Welcome to Minority Trip Report. MTR is a podcast spotlighting stories of personal transformation and underrepresented leaders in mental health, psychedelics, and consciousness. I'm your host, Raj Siraj. If you're learning from or enjoying Minority Trip Report, please subscribe to MTR on YouTube at Minority Trip Report and follow us on Instagram at Minority Trip. Thank you and enjoy the episode. Today, my guest is Heesoo Cho, who is a co-founder of Sabi Mind, a psychedelic-assisted therapy clinic group based in Calgary, Alberta. In seeing the devastating impact of serious mental health challenges on friends and family, Heesoo put his energy and expertise towards opening up safe access to psychedelic treatment with a focus on ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. As managing director of Sabi Mind, Heesoo is responsible for ensuring that Sabi clinics provide best-in-class patient care in the treatment of chronic mental health and pain. Heesoo, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Rod. Excited to be here.
I was thinking about how we should start this conversation. And before we go into how you grew up, I think it's important to orient our audience around where you are.
Well,
And I say this particularly because most of my guests, and certainly what I feel is a lot of the conversations that happen are from people in the coasts of North America, right? Whether you're talking about New York or LA or Toronto or Vancouver, there's very few conversations that we have with people from and representing the middle of the country, right? It doesn't mean it's any less important. It just means that it's not often highlighted and spotlighted. And so one of the things that I'm very excited to do on this podcast is really talk about what is happening in Alberta and Calgary. Not to say you're carrying the weight of the entire population, but I do feel that having spent two very important and transformative years in Calgary, and Calgary certainly holds a really special place in my heart to this day. I spent those 2 years during the pandemic, just as it had started, both in isolation, but in what that city gave to me or what the people gave to me was truly transformative. I met my now wife there 2 months in, and so many amazing things have happened. So I would love to hear what it's like to grow up in a place like Calgary and Alberta, and maybe tell us what people get wrong. Because I feel like if you're in Ontario or in BC, what we hear about Calgary and Alberta is not really what it is, in my opinion. And maybe it's part of what it is. But I think there's a vested interest in portraying Calgary and Alberta in a certain light always. So let's start
Sure.
there. Orient us around what is Calgary, what is Alberta, and how you see that place.
It might have shifted recently, but I feel like for the last little bit, Calgary is and has been Canada's best kept secret. It's this very unique place with such a diverse group of people, culture, businesses. And it's one of those places that has this magic to it, in a sense. Being born and raised Calgary, obviously seeing kind of the changes that have happened over the last 20 years, being integrated in both the energy sectors, but also some of the cultural movements happening in the city as well. It really is becoming a very unique place for the country. Being a local, I've known that for a long time. I've always said Calgary is my home, regardless of going to some of these bigger cities like the Toronto, the Vancouvers, the New Yorks, or the LAs. I always found that when I came back to the city, there was this immense feeling, oh, I'm home. This is my place. This is my people. There's something for everybody. You have to look a little bit harder because of the size of the city is a bit smaller. But as you well know, the city definitely has something for everyone. And I think what maybe some of the other larger jurisdictions get wrong about Calgary is that we're a bunch of cowboys and oil and gas is the only thing that matters. And to be honest, the cowboy culture is fantastic. Stampede is an amazing time and it does wonderful things for the city. Obviously, the energy sector is a huge component of what we do here. But I think when you strip away all those pieces and you try to connect with somebody here locally on a more human, personal level, you find that we are very kind, very compassionate, and very willing to collaborate. And I think those three pieces make this city a very exciting place for future business and organizational opportunities, but also for people to come and enjoy the place and the people and the things that the locals have built. So yeah, that is high level. Calgary, man, what a place. What a place.
I think we'll have to talk a little bit more about Stampede because I think in a lot of people's minds, like Cowboys, Stampede, no.
And that's a huge part of it. But I feel like what it does for the city basically shuts down for 10, 11, 12 days. And the general sentiment from everybody across the board is that people are just happy they're celebrating, regardless of your personal opinions around some of the activities that happen during Stampede. I think, what it does do is it does bring people together. And obviously sharing experience is a huge component of connection. And those 10 days are a part of the magic as well.
Hey, man, and if there's a lot of cowboys and a lot of drinking and throwing up, that's okay too. That's part of it. I just think like you have to take the whole thing
Yeah.
in, and that's certainly been my experience. I really resonate with the fact that you said people are very kind and willing to collaborate. That's certainly been my experience from day one. I'd first gone to Calgary in 2007 while, funny enough, I was on the road as a host for Much Music and doing their web series on what was at that time one of the biggest bands in North America, Finger 11. And I already sensed that. And I think with Calgary, a lot of people don't appreciate, and when I say a lot of people, people outside Calgary and perhaps outside Western Canada, is that people are genuinely community oriented. I haven't sensed that anywhere else in Canada as much as I did, as profoundly as I had in Calgary. People are genuinely, they want to make the place better. They want to help their neighbors. They care about it. And I think coming from a big city, that's almost a little alarming is what do you want? It's like, why are you talking to me still? I've said this in myself. I'm like, yeah, I just said hello. I just want to, I got to walk away. But no,
Yeah.
it's a funny feeling. But where do you think that comes from? Where do you think this innate sense of community and caring and compassion comes from?
Well, like, what I can say is that more often than not, people they follow through, right? They're going to action the things that they talk about. They're going to put the walk to the walk. It's not just going to be about discussing some of these ideas. I think because one, there's abundant opportunity here to pursue passions and meaningful pursuits individually. For sure there is. Just the circumstance and the ecosystem allows you to do that. I think if you have that opportunity on an individual level, once you layer in a collaborative mindset and all these people are about the more kind of action oriented tasks of building things, that creates an environment where things move, right? Where the landscape changes quite rapidly, where new ideas are actioned on immediately. And you start to see the ripple effects of these kind of microtransactions that happen all across the board in all different industries. And I think that's what gives the province a bit of that feeling, is that people here are really like to move on things. They like to execute, and they like to do it in a sense that like they're willing to carry the weight. They're not going to, they're going to be accountable for what they say they want to do, and they're going to try their best to execute it on that. And I think that's what helps move the needle forward for us. I think across all industries, what you're going to find here is that people are willing to put in the work. And that's a huge piece of why I think the province has seen so much change in the last few years. I think just the overall work ethic is generally high. And I think everyone's willing to put in a significant amount of effort to accomplish things here. And we've already discussed the open-minded nature towards collaboration, which I think is a huge piece of it as well. I think cold emailing is a great thing to do here. People usually respond. If they can't help you, they'll definitely connect you with somebody that might be able to. And I think that's just the general sentiment in the kind of business ecosystem here. Yeah. Even in the nonprofit sector or any kind of vertical organizations, I think the willingness to create community and partner is substantial.
Yeah, I certainly felt that too. I think Calgary or Alberta has the highest per capita number of entrepreneurs in the country. I've certainly sensed it's very entrepreneurial in the sense that people do stuff. People get up and they bootstrap and they do things, which I really appreciate. And I think it stems from Alberta's overall sense of fuck you, we're going to do what we want. And there's the good and bad with that. But I certainly appreciated that a lot when I was there because I'm a bit like that too. It's, okay, I want to define myself on my own terms and not be defined by others. Now, of course, there's political implications of that. But I completely agree. The thing the challenge that I had, and we'll talk a little bit about this later on, is that I always said that Alberta or Calgary has a branding problem. It really has a shit brand. And I say that because it's, oh, come here because real estate's cheap, or come here because we got mountains. I'm just like, that's not what it's about, man. What's the outcome of that? Or come here because it's diverse. I'm like, just diversity itself is not, I think, and even I speak as a brown dude, is not the only thing. It's really ultimately what you're talking about. Community oriented, entrepreneurial as fuck, and so on. Anyway, you can tell I'm a fan. Tell me what it was like to grow up as a Korean Canadian, which you identify as Korean Canadian. What was it like, born and raised, and still very much feeling that Calgary is your home?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the community piece. Growing up Korean Canadian, born and raised Calgary, single mom, immigrant parent. Of course, there are associated struggles with that circumstance and situation. I feel very blessed that I had a super hardworking mom who was so loving and so caring and definitely taught me about just being a kind person. And I'm supremely grateful for that influence in my life because I think in my later years, it's only allowed me to be as empathetic as I am today. In terms of the childhood and the growing up, I didn't really realize or contemplate the duality of my childhood in terms of having Korean heritage, filtering it through a Western Canadian lens. Those implications and pressures didn't really associate when I was a kid. I think I did a really great job of integrating myself into what was presented. I found a place existing within whatever was appropriate for me at the time. And that also had to do with me going to 7 different schools before grade 7. I had to learn to pick up friends in a quick way. I had to learn to integrate myself into certain scenarios for survival's sake, more so than anything. So I could either learn or feel supported or support or socialize in general. And I think a huge component of that for me was that I really loved sports as a kid. I played everything and anything. And when you're a kid, you're physically active. There's a team kind of sentiment. There's a goal in mind. The implications of coming from a different heritage or race get stripped away, right? You have this like immediate bond with your teammates. If you excel in sports, you're put on a pedestal as a kid. So the implications of being Korean weren't as visible to me as maybe some other individuals. And I think now that I have time to reflect on it, maybe that was also because that I sheltered myself a little bit from it.
In what sense?
I think for me, it's because I was born here, English was sure my second language in my home, but I picked up English as soon as I entered the school system. And my cultural background was one of a Canadian person. And there are circumstances when I saw some of my classmates who maybe moved here when they were older, when they were in junior high or high school, and they had a very different experience. They had no context for the cultural nuances of being a Canadian. They could barely speak English. And for me, I guess at an early age, removed myself from those situations and didn't do as good of a job as maybe I could have in terms of trying to relate to that. I think my cultural identity when I was young was that of I'm Canadian. Yes, I'm Korean on the background, but I am Canadian. And I think that only.
So it sounds like it was very free flowing, right? Like a lot of the times I felt like us minorities, we get reminded that we're different. We don't necessarily take that in. We don't do that to ourselves in a way.
Yeah. And I definitely came across racism and situations where I felt like my skin color was different and maybe some of my cultural. There were definitely times where I felt different, but I don't think I had the immense. Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to say is that for me, I always felt Canadian. There wasn't a time where I didn't feel welcome in being a Canadian, and I was proud to be. I was lucky enough to represent the country playing sports. And so like my national identity was very robust. I bled red and white. Like I truly did love it. And then that all shifted somewhat recently when I went to Korea right before the pandemic in 2019. I'd been there multiple times before, but it was the first time where I really resonated with my heritage and with the Korean people and with my culture. And it was the first time where I longed for myself to get better understanding of the history of my people and maybe some of the more deeper implications of who I am and where I come from. And so I guess it's only been within the last 4 or 5 years where I've taken the time to get a better understanding of that piece of my life. And yeah, it's been interesting to see the shift. I don't have the why yet, but it's been really exciting to dive a bit deeper into, where my people come from, for sure.
Often I find that it's not the answer that's interesting, is the fact that there's a question to ask or a better question to ask. I think the fact that there's a why here to explore is exciting and interesting. hold on to that thought because I'm going to come back to it. Tell me a little bit about your mom.
Yeah. So comes from a very large family, 5 sisters, 2
Did she grow up
brothers.
here? She moved to
She moved
Canada,
to
I
Canada
assume.
when she was 14, went to junior high school here in Calgary and high school here in Calgary, went to university in Edmonton, met my biological father, had me, all while trying to figure out what it's like to be a young adult in Canada. And I've only somewhat recently been able to have deeper discussions about her experience. One, I think because of maybe my willingness to explore that at a younger age, or maybe my capacity to understand on a deeper level what that actually meant and her journey meant. That has obviously changed now. But also, I think on her side of things, there was maybe some reluctance to dive deeper into it. Because maybe there is a bit of, I don't want to say pain, but there was definitely a lot of struggle. And as a mom, sharing that struggle can be challenging, and I can totally respect that. So it's only been somewhat recently where we've been able to connect on a deeper level about her journey here. And it's been one of, it's the immigrant life. It's like everything is harder. Everything's a lot more challenging. The opportunities are less. The community is smaller. And so, it's a difficult experience for sure. And then on the other side, being able to stay so caring and compassionate and trying to maybe shelter me from some of those hardships. It's just like, you're superhuman. You are, to be able to do that is quite powerful for sure.
All moms are superhuman. I
Yep.
really believe that. Does your father or biological father still have a place in your life?
No, I haven't. Yeah, I haven't had a relationship since I was very young. My mom is now since remarried. So I have 2 stepsister who I love dearly. I always wanted siblings growing up, but I was an only child. And it was only, I guess, when I was 20 that they came into my life. Yeah, wish we would have had the opportunity to grow up together in our younger years. Just seeing like the opportunity to support each other throughout maybe some of the more challenging times as being for sure, I would have loved that. But yeah, it's great to have them now in my life for sure. Okay.
It sounds you've been asking or you've been exploring. So you mentioned you got very close with your mom in terms of actually revisiting her life and understanding her life, which she's also sounds like she's very much more open to speaking about it. Maybe it's because your capacity to understand it now, or maybe something changed in her. Do you feel like you want to connect with your dad as well? Is there a yearning?
Yes,
Is it something you thought about?
all the time, of course, all the time, growing up, all the time. Growing up, especially as a young immigrant male, I, of course, wanted the opportunity to understand what being a man is through the lens of my lineage. And of course, I didn't have that through the direct biological father imprint. But what I did have was the opportunity to connect with multiple friends and their fathers. And I really feel really grateful that I had a community and a village that helped raise me more than one singular person. Were there times where I was frustrated? For sure. Were there times where I was angry and resentful? Absolutely. But I think looking back on those opportunities to get diverse input, diverse ways of understanding what being quote unquote a man is, I feel more grateful to have that experience than the other way around. So to answer your question, would I connect with him? Sure. But I don't think I would go out of my way to do. Yeah.
You didn't feel the absence per se, given that you had all these other positive male role models and father figures in your life.
Yeah.
How does your family see what you're doing now? Do they understand it? Do they see it as something like, whoa, ketamine? Or is it like, no, he's just doing something really cool. He's building a business. He's an entrepreneur. Yeah. And I asked that before. Obviously, I'm going to talk a little bit about, because it's part of your bio, is that the prevalence of mental health challenges in your family that was an impetus for you to build what you're building right now. How does your family generally understand what you're doing?
I don't think they understand the finer details of it quite yet, but that's okay because they're immensely supportive. And It's weird. I think the last thing they wanted to see me do is become an entrepreneur because so
Mm,
many of them were entrepreneurs and they understood how difficult and challenging it could be, and it can be. And when I was younger, there was immense pressure to become a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer or something with just a bit more stability. But now that I can say that my colleagues are physicians, we work with some of these individuals, I think they understand it through that lens, that it's not just, they understand the serious nature of it and the validity of it. And they're very supportive on that front. But we're still working on the finer details. This, and I think that'll be a work in progress for a
there's a
long
time
time
for
to
it
go.
all.
Yeah. And then, yeah, on the mental health side of things, I think now that I've had experience of my own journey, my own mental health journey, just trying to formulate ideas on how we can start conversations with the generations before us. And that was a huge realization for me, is that there's a lot we should be talking about. How do we go about talking about it? I think there is definitely a language barrier, a context barrier in terms of approaching these conversations, maybe an unwillingness to dive into some of the more shadow-esque topics of some of the struggles that parent and kid went through in the immigrant family journey. And what moved the needle for me personally is my own experiences with psychedelics in therapy. And so leveraging that and hopefully providing opportunities for others to do outside of the family piece. Specifically, I lost a very close friend to suicide in 2019. And she was my boss, but also a mentor. He was my bigger brother. Sometimes he was my father. He was like probably the most influential person in my life in my 20s. And to see him pass away the way he did was like earth shattering. I had no context for anything anymore because he was the happiest, brightest person. After sitting with it, diving deeper into it, you realize that there were these signs and maybe opportunities where certain interventions could have been at least discussed or approached, or just general, I guess, awareness around mental health implications could have been higher. And of course, shoulda, woulda, coulda, hindsight is 2020, but that missed opportunity is really what the catalyst was for Sabi Mind. Hey, how can we look at opportunities to support the mental health solution system? Psychedelics looks like it provides a significant opportunity to do. How do we introduce it through the legal medical lens, where there's this incredible layer of safety and efficacy, but also an opportunity to maybe widen the scope of how we approach mental health? And that's why we do what we do, is to, hey, if we can increase curiosity and awareness around all things mental health and then potentially provide solutions on the back end, let's do it.
Thanks for sharing of the inspiration here. What do you think, looking back, of course, hindsight is 2020. What do you think your friend was struggling with that he could not share? What was exactly the blocker, you think?
Yeah, an insane amount of pressure in the work environment. I think he was the tip of the spear and he was the hand that held it. Like, he sheltered us from a lot of the maybe more challenging conversations. He was always the driving force. I think what people may not understand about the hospitality industry is that there are days when you don't want to be a part of the show. There are days when you don't want to be center stage. You don't want to put on the act. You don't want to put on the mask, but you have to. And I think over time, when you do that so frequently and you're not mindful about ensuring that who you are as a person also gets to take main stage outside of the workplace, you lose your identity a little bit. You lose your sense of self, and you lose the ability to understand when and where the mask comes into play, and where and when your values or morals or boundaries also come into play too. And I think all those implications, plus being around substances all the time, it's just a combination for potential harm if you're not immensely mindful about what you're doing. And so I think that had a huge influence on it. But I also think maybe that the stigma piece is huge in that scenario. Is we all pretended like we were doing so well because we were so scared of being vulnerable and open with each other and then talking about maybe what was actually going on behind the scenes.
I feel like most of us are performing one way or another on our best days, never mind in hospitality and entertainment. When I've worked in that space for many years, there's this outer shell, that there's this thing you have to portray, the mask that has to stay on. And you couple that with alcohol and substances, which gives you a false sense of bravado. You think you're living your true self and true life. And then, of course, underneath it is this almost like turmoil. And even outside the space, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, we'll talk about this later on, is this I do feel like it's prevalent. Mental health turmoil and despair and like lots of crisis and struggles it feels like it's all over the entertainment hospitality space. But before we talk about that, how did you cope with the loss of your friend? You mentioned your own of mental health journey with psychedelics and so
Mm.
on, but what was that like?
No, I didn't do it very well. It was a lot of trial and not error. I don't want to say error, but it was a lot of trial, trying different things, getting different perspectives. I think what I realized and I'm grateful for is that moment really showed me that I had also been following down a very similar path. I didn't really have a great understanding of who I was. My personal identity and values were basically non-existent. And so I was starting from scratch. This was right before the pandemic. After he had passed, I doubled down with work, took on all the responsibilities that he had, and just dug myself a deeper hole. God bless the pandemic. And I know that's a challenging thing for me to say because it had such a negative impact on so many others. But for me, it was really an opportunity to just lean everything out in my life. Didn't have work staring right back at me for 2 months. And so I had all this time to figure out who I was as a person. And it was the most challenging process I had ever been through. Going from having no time to having all the time, all the space and capacity to face yourself when you don't recognize the person you're looking at is terrifying. It's terrifying. And so obviously the traditional talk therapy route, it was super beneficial in terms of giving me kind of high level tools and frameworks to start thinking about these topics and ideas. Some of the wellness practices like meditation moved the needle for me immensely. Like I went on almost a 200-day streak of doing at least 5 to 30 minutes a day. And it really helped me with the contextualization of space and time and filling your own space. And that for me was like the foundation for me trying to build who I was in that identity piece. And then obviously psychedelics. I was really lucky enough to find a psilocybin practitioner, had a couple sessions, and transformational, man. Like eye-opening, heart-opening, spirit-opening, all these pieces that like you're in awe of like how grandiose the human existence can be and how small your part in it is. And that is so wonderful. And I don't want to say reassuring, but it just puts things into perspective. And for me, I think compounding all those pieces and opportunities to like take the time to put in the work and figure out who I was and am and who I want to be, it really started what will be a lifetime journey of figuring that out. And I think psychedelics has a part to play in it, but I also want to caveat that with what works for me is not going to work for everybody. And I think we need to communicate that a little bit more effectively in the space. And we also have to do a better job of taking away all the hype around the medicine piece specifically. They're powerful tools and in the right scenarios can be very effective. But what's more important, the individuals themselves and their willingness and capacity to do the work associated with it. Psychedelics really powerful for me, but for everyone, take your time, do your research, find a good support system. Yeah.
That is so well said. Recognizing that these are very powerful tools and not the end in and of itself is really important, I think, because sometimes we get too infatuated with the sensations and the consumption. You know, if fun Is the end goal? Absolutely. I think absolutely. The question is, how do you do it safely? But if transformation is the goal, I think you're right. We need to talk about it much more openly about what else do you couple it with. Good relationship, friendship, support, community, good habits are equally important as these tools open you up. What did you know? Like, so talking about it was right for you, how did you know it was right for you? And what did you know about psychedelics beforehand?
Not a lot. And everything was filtered through a recreational lens before this, I think. I had tried psilocybin, LSD in my younger years, had really negative experiences because I just didn't have the context to understand what was going on. Also, don't think that the level of respect needed was there for me
Hmm.
personally. The way I found it was interesting. Obviously, I, I don't want to say obviously, but I was following the cannabis kind of trajectory through the medical legal markets and then obviously the recreational market for Canada. Alongside that news flow, you'd start to see a little bit of the psychedelic kind of ecosystem developing. Jump down the rabbit hole there just to see what the space was about. Realize that like it was this never ending space of like ideas, researchers, people who had come before, obviously some corporations, but it was just like immense space and with very interesting, intelligent people. So got very curious, started attending some conferences online, realized that I needed to figure out a way to try it in more of a traditional therapeutic setting. Was lucky to have a community that maybe knew some way ins. And then I went through my first experience and it was really, really difficult. Had to do a lot with closure and reconciling what had happened in the last couple of years. The second experience for me was the one where I knew it was like, okay, there's something here. Everyone talks about the meeting of God or meeting of the higher power. And I had one of those experiences and I was very surprised the form that this entity came in. It was like, yeah, you could just feel this immense, deep presence that wasn't frightening by any means, but it did demand a certain level of respect. And then I realized that in that moment that I was connected to this presence. And then everyone talks about the interconnected piece. And for me, that moment, how awe-inspiring it was, shifted a lot of things and my capacity to believe in certain things as well. And I think I will carry that moment with me for the rest of my life. And I think when certain situations do come up where that experience is put into question or life can get challenging at times, I think I lean into moments like that where the situations seem less abrasive or tough or challenging as they do. So
Thanks for sharing. Obviously, I have to ask the question, do you talk about your experience and transformation openly? And have you shared with your family and your Korean Canadian community?
no, I haven't. And I have with maybe some of my cousins who are my age and understand and maybe have also gone through similar experiences. I haven't quite yet with the older generation, my mom, these are uncles, just only because the ability to understand the what and the how maybe isn't there. The ability to understand the why is definitely there. And I think that would be a great starting place to do. But I feel like at this time, the conversation would be quite limited. And that's okay. And that's a fine place to start. I just haven't taken the time to do so quite yet. Do I speak about my experiences openly with my community? Yes, for sure. I think I'm pretty private. I do enjoy brevity, so I keep my stories short, and sometimes I try not to share them at all. But in the right circumstances, absolutely, I'm willing to share. I think definitely need to do a better job of it in terms of supporting maybe some of the stigma shifting conversations for sure. I could be a better advocate on that front. But also, they're supremely private experiences. They're so, yeah, so private, so special that it's hard to put to words this experience that was life altering.
Mm.
Maybe that's the struggle that I have too, is that one, I don't want to sound too woo, That always comes in the
There's
picture.
enough of that. We don't need more of that woo-woo stuff.
Exactly. And so you want to keep it real and you want to keep it relatable, but also you want to keep it true to your experience. And that's a really challenging thing to do. And so I guess to answer your question, yes, I do share, but I need to do a better job of it.
I understand that totally. And I'm actually share a lot of that position because on one hand, the question is, how much do I share that it's universal and should be less destigmatized? Which is that conversation around mental health. Because ultimately, like whether you're doing meditation, whether you're seeing someone, that's the important part. To me, psychedelics could be part of your journey or maybe not, but that's okay. But it is a journey that we have to get on. Doesn't matter where the pit stops are. If psychedelics is part of that journey eventually at some point, great. But that's the part. But on the other hand, I, like you, am very private with some of the most like profound aspects of my journey. What came up, not because I'm shy, not because I don't want to share, but it's because they're for me. And maybe they're for the closest people in my life. And maybe that's who I want to share it with. And I feel completely fine with that. Nobody's entitled to my story of transformation in a way. I only share them if it helps and uplifts others. It's not like a drum I want to bang all the time. Like, hey, I did psychedelics. I definitely don't want to be that, because the next thing you know, what's going to happen? I'm going to sell courses on Instagram. Please buy my. No, I really appreciate that framing, Heesoo. Thank you. I want to switch gears a bit and talk about what you guys are doing, because I think it's really special. No one else that I've spoken with is doing it in the way that you guys are doing it, and doing the work and building a network of clinics talking about ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. You guys are doing the first clinical trial with psilocybin and alcohol use disorder in Alberta. I think that's pretty special. So I want to talk about that. But I want to pull out a stat that feels is the premise for this kind of work and for this particular clinical study, which is over 3/4 of Albertans aged 15 and older report drinking alcohol, and per capita consumption in Alberta continues to be higher than the national average. Heavy alcohol use is recognized as a third leading risk factor for premature death and disability, and is a known risk factor for many preventable chronic diseases, including cardiovascular disease, cancer, and diabetes. Why do you think this is so prevalent? It's an issue in modern society, but why do you think it's so prevalent in Alberta?
Hearing that stat is not shocking by any means. I lived it. Like my circle of friends and the way I was brought up, we started drinking at a very young age, even around that time of 15, 14, and have been doing so for since then. The why piece, I think I can only speak to that from a personal standpoint. I think it has to do with maybe access, right? Our drinking legal age is 18 this year. Not that I'm going to speak on the legal system at all, but I feel like there's an opportunity to access liquor at a young age through certain means here that maybe it isn't quite available in other places. I think, and I can't really speak on it now, but the high school and university cultures here in Alberta are very aligned with a drinking culture, whether that is through sport, whether that is through community, whether that is through fraternities. There's definitely is a piece of being an Albertan that is associated with drinking that you can see when you come here. If you're from Vancouver and you come to Calgary, you're going to see patios that are full with people drinking beer anytime it's sunny throughout the year.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
You are going to see like a very robust nightlife food and beverage scene. And I think people enjoy it. And rightfully, I think there's something to be said about a healthy relationship with alcohol that can be beneficial and that can be positive. It's just, how do we have the conversation around when does that become too much? Coming from the hospitality industry, I definitely saw the need for interventions around alcoholism and substance abuse in general. Feel very excited that we have the opportunity with Clairvoyant to do so with the psilocybin trial. Yeah.
I think the prevalence of it's a blue collar economy by and large, as you mentioned, right? It's very much around resource extraction, resources, and every province in Canada would be foolish to say Canada is not a resource intensive and resource extractive nation. But I think the prevalence of blue collar jobs and blue collar lifestyle, and not to mention it's cold a lot of the year, and so drinking is obviously part of the coping mechanism. But it's also, I completely agree with you. Like some of the best food and drinks I've had in Alberta. I mean, not Thai food. I would say some of the worst Thai food I've had in my life was in Alberta. But the barbecue is fantastic.
Going to the wrong places, my friend. I'll show you around next time you're here.
Oh my God. I laugh at that still. Somebody told me, because like I love Thai food. And then I went to Calgary and somebody's, oh, you got to try this place. I'm like, and I tried it. And with my wife, I'm like, this is fucking bullshit, man. This is like orange ketchup. It's not pad Thai. But anyway, but the barbecue is fantastic. But where I'm going with that is I think the prevalence of blue collar economies with I would say, seasonal labor, a population, I think maybe has something to do with that. Tell me a little bit about Sabi Mind. What is Sabi Mind, and why is this particular clinical study, which is again the first in Alberta, which is fantastic? Why is this so important for you guys? What are you trying to say, and what are you trying to demonstrate?
I think when it comes to a study, let's start there. It's very important because when you look at even our main service offering, which is ketamine-assisted psychotherapy for mental health and chronic pain conditions, those are the only two avenues that are currently applicable for CAT. We're not even scratching the addictions piece because there isn't guidance quite yet from our College of Government to do that. We can have these new novel interventions for mental health conditions and chronic pain indications, but the addiction stream is still the addiction stream. And there hasn't been any innovation in that space for however long. You and I know both that. So for us to have an opportunity to lace in some of the principles of what we're doing with psychedelics through this clinical trial to support that community, fantastic. We love to see it. We love to support it. And the fact that it's a sponsored trial, increasing access is a huge component of what we're about, what we're working on. I'm interested to see, one, the outcomes, but also the future opportunities once the data does come out. Will we have guidance to expand our ketamine program to introduce substance abuse indications down the road? What does this do for the coverage piece of these treatments? Obviously, a huge barrier to these treatments around the world right now is the price point. And so how quickly can we mobilize the data, both from our main practice, from the clinical trial, leverage the data, present to third-party payers, present to regulators to show, one, the medical efficacy, the safety, but also the economic impact and value down the road. Yes, we're a downstream treatment center, but I think our approach and our modality is actually more upstream than anything. We're looking at maybe shifting mindset to a prophylactic mindset where you're a bit preventative. And I think that's the future opportunity. We're supporting a client base right now that is and has tried everything in the space, and they're looking for alternatives, or they're looking for different solutions because their needs are being met. But down the road, how do we support healthy people who also want to ensure that their mental health stays where it's at or expands and grows? And so for us, I think that's the future that we're trying to build. I think everything that we do right now is to support the community that needs it the most. But I think with ketamine and a clinic network, we're really building foundation for the future when access is unilaterally increased, coverage is there. And so the opportunity for more individuals to experience these types of modalities is also there. Of course, could say that it's not for everyone, right? It's not going to be, but I think people should have the option to at least explore it as an option for them. They should have the opportunity to educate themselves, feel empowered to make the right decision on whether or not this could be a beneficial intervention for them. And then looking down the road, you're familiar with MAPS, MDMA, the whole FDA process there, just a matter of time. They're saying October of this year. Who knows if that happens? We'll see. Health Canada will probably follow suit. Psilocybin right now is making its kind of journey along with Health Canada. And I think we're excited for those opportunities to integrate those compounds into our practice as well down the road.
Fantastic. There's so many things that you just said that I feel is really important to highlight. One of them is, I really believe if you get beyond extreme pain and peak performance, this is in middle ground, which is how do people integrate interventions like this? Again, whether it's meditation, whether it's, therapy, whether it's ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, how do you integrate that into your day in, day out, right? How does it become part of your life as a way to come back to center, as a way to maintain a positive relationship with your surroundings, have good relationships that are nurturing, and so on. one of those, and as you mentioned, rightfully, one of the biggest barriers is coverage, the cost, right? Now, I think when most people, if you're in the psychedelic ecosystem, will look at a clinical network, and the first thing that comes to mind is something, let's say, like a field trip or something like that. Now, the field trip, unfortunately, has folded recently, as we all know. How is Sabi Mind different from what, let's say, the approach Field Trip was taking? And I've been really impressed. I've known you for 2 years probably now at this time. Like I met you at the tail end of me departing Alberta. So I'm very impressed by your framing of it and the fact that you're willing to go slow and steady. The fact that you're willing to do the foundational work. How do you stand out as a clinical network, not just in relation to Field Trip, but overall? What tone are you setting?
We've always been hyper focused on becoming, improving, and executing on the clinic model. We haven't ever really veered away from that. When we set out to open up a clinic, it's let's build the best clinic with the best people, best offering we can. And I think because with psychedelics is a unique experience to explore not only healthcare, but experience curation, which is hospitality. There is a unique opportunity to really lean into what we call the pillars. We're a brick and mortar service-based company, meaning that we live and die by the people that we hire, the people we help, of what we actually offer, which is ketamine-assisted psychotherapy right now. The people and product, obviously significant. The place, so jurisdictions matter to us as well. Calgary, near and dear to our hearts, wanted to ensure that it had a place and a say on the national stage. We didn't want to just follow what Toronto and Vancouver were doing. And last and most importantly, purpose. Like, why are we doing this? Is it just for the monetary upside of building a psychedelic startup? No, it's not. I think if nothing else, Sabi will always be a community-based response, meaning that no matter where we are, Calgary, Edmonton, Victoria, if we extend further, we will be hyper focused and critical and do the work to ensure that what we provide is informed by both the practitioners that we hire, but also the community we're looking to support. Extensive engagement, both through traditional stakeholder engagement, but just getting out into the community to get understanding of like, where's the gap and how do we support? And does what we've formulated in the background actually resonate with the audience, right? You've been to the space in Calgary. Obviously, it has a certain aesthetic. Will this be the case for Edmonton? Probably not. We're probably going to dial some of those pieces back because what works for the audience here in Calgary isn't what's going to work in Edmonton. And so to go back to your statement about going slower than maybe some of these organizations, we do that because there's an intentionality around it. We take the time to make the right connections with the right practitioners, but then also take the time to figure out what would best support the community that we're looking to be a part of.
Where does best in class patient care in this particular setting mean? And I'm asking this from a perspective of raising capital, right? Because I think there's obviously what it feels like an innate battle between saying best in class, patient centric, value based care, and then what traditional, let's say, venture backed businesses end up becoming, or traditional VC capital, what they want to see. Are you seeing that your investor base and you're raising capital? Are you seeing that there's a better understanding of this space, or do you have to spend a lot of time educating your investors about how this place is different? So it's not just like a network of clinics, it's a very different kind of model of care.
I think it depends on the type of investor that we're speaking to. There's obviously the individuals who are pretty familiar with the content of psychedelics. There definitely in every conversation is a lot of time spent on why we're different or our approach. And when it comes to us pursuing the best in class piece is that we will always stay hypercritical about our practices. It's always going to be efficacy, safety, access. How are we moving the needle on those three pieces every day? And how are we ensuring that the team is also aligned to do? And going back to the time it is taking for us to enter these new jurisdictions is exactly that. It is finding the right people, the right timing to execute on these things. I think when you look at our model specifically, we've done some unique things that I'm not going to dive too deep into, but from a more of a, I guess, business lens and aspect, we've definitely altered the approach to a traditional clinic that has given us opportunity to be maybe a bit more flexible than some of these other providers. Yeah, and a bit more longevity as well. That'll be the case moving forward, I think. Yeah, the model is unique.
So how do you position yourself when you're speaking to investors in terms of the return profile? And again, I want to position it in terms of, I think people who support their patients, who support people and communities and services that support people and communities well, are the ones that will be profitable, that will be here for the long term. I sincerely believe that. So how do you convince an investor that this is the right play for the brick and mortar model?
Yeah, I think when you look at exit opportunities or liquidity opportunities for us, because the way we've built the back end, we're flexible in that sense. There's different trajectories in terms of how we can take this vessel to ensure that shareholder value is there when we do have opportunities for exit. I think we have contemplated and come across opportunities for a public transaction. I don't think the timing is right for that. We have entertained bigger PE opportunities, really scaling the clinic network, looking at more of traditional M&A opportunities for our early shareholders. But I think it goes back to exactly what you said. Regardless of which opportunity we take, if we focus on what we're doing right now, build a really strong business, look for opportunities to add additional revenue streams and income opportunities, the future exits will take care of themselves, right? And I think the longer we're here, the more opportunity to take hold of the market share, to really be the industry leader, both from a service and product side, but also an advisory capacity to regulators as well. I think right now, if the potential investor has the patience to wait and see how this market really develops, if they pick us as their pony, we're positioned really nicely to one, have visibility on upstream drug development coming through pipeline, through clinical trials, but also what at the end of the day is going to be the bread and butter is potential clients and the actual consumer of these products. We're in the middle ground between that. We have real infrastructure that is providing these treatments day in, day out, moving the needle forward, having positive treatment outcomes. Compound that for the next 12, 16, 18 months, when the landscape will look very different. I think the opportunities for exits will be abundant. But for now, the conversation that we have is that we're hyper-focused on what we're doing. We've built a business that has fundamentals and that can survive. Do this consistently, position ourselves as a leader. When it comes to exit, we'll have options.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think it is back to basics, back to fundamentals, right? The zero interest environment is done. I don't think it's going to come back anytime. So investing in everything like it's software is dumb shit, to be honest. And I think course correcting, not only for fundamentals, but also investor psychology, I think is really important, right? So understand anything that is impact oriented. We're literally correcting for the last 200 years in a lot of ways of mass industrialization and how it's fucked up people. I'm not saying it come without immense benefit to society. Like we're doing this remotely, right? All this has come out of that. So it's not a matter of good or bad. I think it's a matter of, do we get to honestly choose the future we want, and what bits and pieces do we go with forward?
Yeah.
Let's come back, bring it all. We're almost at time. So I have one last question for you. And I'm going to ask you to think back to your why, which I know you haven't answered yet, but it's a question that you've asked. Given that your story of transformation, experience with psychedelics, understanding yourself better, having a better appreciation of your culture, of your heritage, having a better, more closer relationship with your mother, being a business leader, being a leader, trying to be a thoughtful leader and trying to navigate and build a good business through this very complex, challenging time. What do you think? And perhaps we didn't touch on your time as a Canadian, as an athlete. Maybe borrow from that as well. What do you think makes a good, thoughtful leader, particularly at this point of time, as a person of color, as a Korean Canadian, and so on?
Huge question. to finish on. Huge. You're familiar with Ray Dalio? Yeah. Meaningful pursuits, meaningful relationships. I think those two pieces resonate really deep with me. And I think when it comes to being a leader, there's a certain level of responsibility for you to create spaces, safe spaces for people to do those two things, to go after meaningful pursuits and to build meaningful relationships. And I think the more you can nurture spaces for people to do that and explore what it means for them subjectively, the better. And I think alongside that, the challenging piece is that I think we've all realized that maybe the certain standards and frameworks of capitalism aren't what they quite used to be and maybe don't really resonate with everybody laterally in our system. So how do we incorporate their desires and their wants also alongside what we're currently doing today? How do we create space for people to have conversations around different ways of approaching building businesses, building organizations, contributing to things? And I think the more containers of safety you can create, the more opportunities you can maybe be vulnerable with your team while still being accountable to each other. I think that's the starting place for a leader. I think you don't ever stop growing as a leader. There's a duality that comes with leadership that you're always juggling: too hard, too soft, too open, too private, all these types of kind of implications that you juggle day in and day out. You never really quite master, but I think it's the pursuit of that mastery that also helps you formulate the leader that you want to be in the certain circumstances that you face pending the project, right? I think what I thought a leader used to be playing rugby, completely different than what I'm doing now when I was a leader in hospitality, also different, right? So I think it's just about figuring out your personal purpose, figuring out the team's kind of internal purpose as an organization, and then looking at opportunities for growth there and nurturing that growth.
Very well said. And I certainly want to say that in the time that I know you, I've always seen you as a very grounded and self-aware individual. And I think when you have leaders like that who are building businesses, particularly in this point of time, it does infuse the business with the same values. I think the ability to be self-aware, to course correct, to understand fundamentals is really important. All to say, congratulations on all your success and progress so far. Work doesn't end, whether in the outer world or the inner world, but it is definitely a worthy pursuit. So, Heesoo, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
This podcast was brought to life with the help of Carolyn Tripp on art and design. Thanks so much for listening to Minority Trip Report. If you're learning from or enjoying the podcast, please subscribe to MTR on YouTube at Minority Trip Report and follow us on Instagram at Minority Trip. It's a zero-cost way to support us and help us spread the word. Please also sign up with your email for new episode announcements, events, as well as our forthcoming newsletter. I'm your host, Raj Suraj. See you next time.